Hello, everyone. We are back. It's a new week. I saw how much everyone was enjoying my last video, so I thought I would make another one. But I just want to say that I do make other content on this channel, so please do not be sad if you do not see one of these videos next week posted. I just wanted to say that. Thank you to all the new subscribers that I've seen roll in over here over the past few months. I see you. How you doing? Anyways, if you read the title of today's video, then you know I am ranking every Jurassic franchise movie that there is. Well, we'll talk about that a bit later. I do not own a Jurassic Park shirt, so I'm sorry, we're gonna have to be stuck with this Coraline one. But I do in fact have a tooth. So I hope that makes up for it. If you do not want to hear my rules and parameters, please skip to this timestamp down below. If you do, then stick around for it. Getting straight into the rules and parameters, I am not going to be including any of the spin-off series. I know that's not how you say series, but you get what I'm trying to say. I know there's like a Jurassic kids show. I'm not going to be including that. I'm just going to be doing the Jurassic movies, that being Park and World. Those are the only ones I'm going to be including in this ranking. That's basically it for the entire gist of it. I'm just going to be ranking every single one of the movies, and it's going to be my personal ranking. So feel free not to agree with it. Also, please feel free to put your ranking in the comment section. You can explain yourself or you don't have to explain yourself. Also, I should be saying I'm going to be giving a detailed synopsis on every single movie for my benefit and for your benefit, just in case it's been a few years since you've seen the movie and you want a general gist of what has happened in the movie. I also forget to say it, but I do have my notebook here, so if you see me looking down, that is what I'm referring to get my notes. I have pages of notes, and I'm already anticipating this video is going to be a bit longer, so feel free to grab a snack or a water and let's get straight into the movies. We are starting off with Jurassic Park, which came out in 1993. The opening scene, we see a dinosaur being transported to the island and it goes wrong, or the dinosaur being transported into its exhibit, and I would consider this to be foreshadowing for the entire movie. You know, if we start off the first movie in this series and someone gets eaten by a dinosaur, I think we should know, right? We should know. And because this person gets eaten by one of the dinosaurs, this kind of threatens John Hammond, who is the owner of the park. This kind of threatens him being able to open the park. And so, an insurance investigator or someone who is an insurance investigator who basically represents these different companies or CEOs that are wanting to invest in this park is basically sent in, and he is told, I need expert opinion to say that this park is safe for us to open it to the public. So that kind of makes John Hammond want to seek out different people that can be like, give him the green light basically to open the park. And that is when we are introduced to Alan Grant and Ellie Sadler. Alan Grant, I think, is a paleontologist. I'm sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. And Ellie Sadler is a paleobotanist. So she specializes in, I believe, plants and stuff, and he specializes in really the bones and the dinosaurs. So they have two different areas of expertise. For this movie, I'll be calling him Dr. Grant, and I'll be calling Ellie Sadler Dr. Sadler, because that is what they're called in this movie. Their titles will change throughout the series, but Dr. Grant, Dr. Sadler, just as a rule of thumb for this movie. So it is established from the beginning that Dr. Grant doesn't really like kids. He finds them to be nasty, dirty, just all of the above. And then we switch into their little tent, and John Hammond is waiting in there, and he basically invites them to Jurassic Park to, be the specialist that can sign off, give him the go to continue moving forward with the park. At first, they're not really up for the idea. Dr. Grant wants to stay and work on his work. They eventually do agree to go with John Hammond to the park because John agrees to fund their research for the next upcoming 3 years. And then we jump to a bit of a side story that becomes relevant later on in the plot. We are introduced to Dennis, who works at the parks. He is basically making a deal with this guy to give him 15 different species embryos, the embryos of 15 different species in the park, and sell it to him. He's supposed to gather the embryos, put them in a shaving cream bottle that he can hide the embryos in. He's supposed to transport them to the dock, hand them off to the guy. For every single embryo that he's able to transport, he gets $75,000. So 15 embryos, $75,000 each. You can do the math. The reason he's doing this is because he doesn't believe he's getting paid enough for his work at the park by John Hammond, who, I'll say it now, who we find out is his father, or at least he calls him dad. So I think it'd be weird if he wasn't his son for him to call him dad, but he does have a different last name, so that's why I wasn't a bit sure. But he calls him dad. So we'll say he's his father. Now, jumping to the helicopter, they are all in being transported to the island. On the helicopter is John Hammond. It is the insurance investigator, and that's the only name we're going to be giving him, is Dr. Sadler, Dr. Grant, and then we are introduced to Dr. Malcolm, who is a mathematician who has been invited by the insurance investigator, not John Hammond, but the insurance investigator, to help give the green go on the island. And then our three doctors, insurance investigator, is given basically a tour of the different parts of the park. They're shown DNA sequencing through a ride. They're shown the dino birth, dino feedings, and Dr. Grant and Dr. Sadler are very much interested in the ongoings, how they are able to make these dinosaurs live. They're kind of, like a kid in the candy store. Dr. Malcolm is a bit more apprehensive. He's like, how do you know they're not going to breed? This is one thing that comes up, and this is when we're introduced to Dr. Wu, who in this movie does not play a big part, but I will introduce him now because he is crucial to the entire series. He's saying, oh, they cannot breed in the wild, all the dinosaurs are female. And he's like, how do you know that? He said, well, do you think two females can breed? And well, Dr. Malcolm is like, I'm not saying that that's necessarily true, but a direct quote from Dr. Malcolm is, life will find a way. And he's really in this movie talking about things like chaos theory and different mathematic things, the butterfly effect. He's just overall, throughout the beginning of the movie and throughout the tours, being very, very skeptical of if the park should be a thing in the first place, because I don't believe he thinks it should be a thing, and if they are able to keep these animals within the bounds that they are setting for them. And I mean, he's not wrong. But this kind of just makes Hammond not like him, obviously, because the insurance investigator is sitting here hearing all of this. And I mean, John is trying to open this park. I should also say John Hammond is a very, I would say, naive but excited and hopeful person. He wants everything to go correct. He even at a certain point brings in his grandchildren named Lex and Tim to also show the insurance investigator that this is our target audience, and I want you to see how they react to the park. Sorry, I had to move my shirt. It was sitting weirdly and it was bothering me. And I should say they are brought in a bit later into the tours. They don't get a tour of the facility. They get to go on what I would call a safari tour. They are sat in the car. So, okay, there's two different cars. There's one car with the kids, Lex and Tim, and the insurance investigator. And then there's a second car behind it that has Dr. Malcolm, Dr. Sadler, and Dr. Grant in it. These cars are self-driving cars, which I think is pretty cool. They get in the car, and the car is supposed to basically drive them through these different dino exhibits, and they're not seeing any dinosaurs on this tour. And eventually, Dr. Sadler, Dr. Grant get out of the car, which leads everyone in the front car to get out of the car, and they investigate this thick triceratops. And being the paleobotanist, I'm sorry, I'm going to get these names, I'm trying my best here. Being a paleobotanist, Dr. Sadler wants to do a bit more research because she believes the reason that the triceratops is sick is because it has eaten something wrong. And she analyzes the plants around and kind of hypothesizes. And the reason I mention this is because when a storm is coming on, Dr. Sadler decides to go back to we'll call it back to the base area, the buildings. A bit later, she decides to stay and investigate. And when everyone goes back to the cars, in one car, it ends up only being Dr. Malcolm and Dr. Grant. And in a second car, it also ends up again being the insurance investigator, Lex, and Tim. So now she is separate from the main group. Now back to the control room. It's where the scene cuts to. We are introduced to Nedry and we are introduced to Dennis again. They work the control room. They're the computer people. Because there was some technical difficulties, I believe, or something happening with the track that the cars were on, Dennis, who is basically, I would say, him and Nedry work in two different departments when it comes to the park systems. Like Nedry, I believe, would control a different part and Dennis controls one part. And Dennis basically says that he has let the system reboot, and so some key things or some things might turn off during the system reboot. And this is basically a lie. He is actually, in fact, set it so that some of the systems will turn off so that he is able to break into the different rooms and steal embryos without getting caught on camera and without having to run into different barriers that he normally would have to run into. And so, because he has turned the power off, he has also turned off the electric fences around different parts of Jurassic Parks, and he has also turned off the self driving cars that have our doctors and our kids in it. And it just so happens that these self driving cars stop in front of the T Rex paddock. And because the fence has been turned off, this allows the T Rex to basically break through the fence and into Jurassic Park. And so, upon seeing this, Dr. Malcolm and Dr. Grant basically just sit still because Dr. Grant knows that in the Jurassic Park world, I think it has been proven that this is not necessarily true, but in the Jurassic Park universe, T Rexes cannot see you if you don't move. And the insurance investigator who was in the car with the children, instead of staying with the children, I said that word incorrectly, he runs off into this bathroom to hide, leaving the children in the car by themselves. And because the children do not know this rule, Lexi ends up turning on one of the flashlights. I think she was doing it to basically get Dr. Grant's attention because they had been left alone. But this actually ends up alerting the T-Rex that they're in the car, and the T-Rex starts attacking the car. And so what ends up happening is Dr. Malcolm holds up a flare to draw the T-Rex away from attacking the children's car, and that allows Dr. Grant enough time to be able to get the children out of the car. In the scuffle and scuffery, I know that's not a real word, but now it is, Dr. Malcolm gets knocked out. Our insurance investigator gets eaten by the T-Rex. And at the end of the sequence, basically, Dr. Grant is left to take care of these kids, and they are stuck in the T-Rex's exhibit, which leads to the rest of the exhibits in the park. And that is where they have to that's what they have to go through to get back to the base buildings. Basically, they have to travel through Jurassic Park to get back to safety. I hope that makes sense. And Dr. Sadler, who is now back at the control room with the employee who took her there, they don't know that Lex, Tim, and Dr. Grant are in Jurassic Park now. They just know that they are in the cars that are stopped in front of the T-Rex exhibit. So John Hammond asks his employee, and so Dr. Sadler goes along to retrieve everyone from the self-driving cars. Now switching back to Dennis, who, if you remember, was going to get the embryos. His car ends up spinning out and crashing, but he ends up running into a group of Dilophosaurus. Long story short, he gets X'd by the Dilophosaurus, which the reason I mention this is because he is the only one that can reboot the system in the control room that he messed up. Also, he did all of that just to not even be able to make it, just to not even be able to get the money. But cutting back to Dr. Sadler and the employee, when they arrive to the self-driving cars, they notice that one of the cars is missing. They notice that the restroom that was perfectly built is now destroyed. And in the rubble, they find Dr. Malcolm. He is the only one they are able to find. But before they are able to actually look for Lex, Tim, and Dr. Grant, the T-Rex comes back. So Dr. Sadler, the employee, and Dr. Malcolm make their way back to the base. And in this scene, they're getting chased by a dinosaur. I think it's a really cool scene, and I definitely think you should go rewatch it if you haven't seen it in a while. Skipping forward a little bit, even after knowing that his grandkids are now in Jurassic Park with Dr. Grant having to go through everything, John Hammond is still hopeful that the park will be opened after this. He's kind of having this conversation with Dr. Sattler in what I would call the diner area, and he's just like, it can still happen. And Dr. Sattler is basically like, no, you've seen all that's happened so far. You know, there's too much that's already happened for the park to be open. People have been exed, let it go. And now switching back to Dr. Grant and the kids, they are basically traveling through Jurassic Park. They walk through Brachiosaurus Valley is what I will call it. They also, Dr. Grant finds eggs, proving that Dr. Malcolm was right and that life did find a way. They run into just these different obstacles through the park, running into dinosaurs to get back to safety. We also find out in this scene through Tim teasing Lex. Tim calls her a computer nerd, and she says, I'm not a computer nerd. I'm a hacker. You know, there's a difference. Stop making fun of me for it. That becomes important later. Switching back to the console room, because Dennis isn't back yet and they don't know when he's going to be back, at this point, Nedry assumes that he is gone. So he tells Hammond there is a way to reboot the system, but we aren't going to be able to reboot it by going through Dennis's computer. The best solution is to just reset, reboot, restart the system basically. And they cannot do this from the control room. They have to go to the breaker room to be able to do this. And so Nedry decides to go to the breaker room to reboot the rest of the system. At this point, I'm going to be switching back from Dr. Sattler to Dr. Grant because that's how the movies kind of go. We are watching all these different stories in tandem. So I'm sorry if it seems like I'm hopping around, but that's kind of just how the movie goes. And so because Nedry was taking a very long time, Dr. Sattler and the employee decide to go in and see if he needs help or what's happening. In this sequence, what happens is the raptors have gotten loosed, and so the employee stays behind to kind of fend off the raptors, and Dr. Sattler goes into the breaker room to start the system again. John Hammond and Dr. Malcolm stayed behind and they are helping her to be able to know what she's supposed to press and what she's supposed to do to get the system started again. And now switching back to Dr. Grant and the kids, they are climbing this fence to get into this new territory. And just as Dr. Sadler is turning on the last breaker to reactivate the fences, Tim is climbing on the fence. He gets electrocuted and Dr. Grant has to revive him. And it successfully works, thankfully. It was a 10,000 volt fence. In real life, I don't know how that would work, but in the movie world, it does. And I'm happy that it does. I definitely didn't want to see, the other thing that would have happened if it didn't. I'm just saying 10,000 volts. Going back to Dr. Sadler in the breaker rooms, after she has reset the system, she's basically going on her way to head back to the control room, but she ends up getting attacked by a raptor. And then she kind of backs into a wall and a hand falls on her and she thinks it's Nedry. It is Nedry, but it is Nedry's severed arm. So that confirms to us that Nedry has more than likely been attacked by raptors and has been X'd. She does end up escaping, but more on that later. Dr. Grant is able to get him and the kids back to the main area. He leaves the kids in the same dining area that their grandfather was in previously with Dr. Sadler, and he goes off to find Dr. Sadler. And this is where we get the iconic raptor kids kitchen scene. Because he's left the kids alone, they have to hide from the raptors. They end up trapping one in a freezer, and before they are able to trap the other one, they run into Dr. Sadler and Dr. Grant. After meeting up in the middle, they all go to the control room and are basically trying to reboot the park system because Dr. Grant and Dr. Sadler are at the door and the door mechanism isn't working because the system isn't completely up yet. And so they're not able to reboot the system and also hold off the door to the raptor. And so this is where Lex, being a hacker, comes into play. She's at the computer and she is able to find the correct thing on the computer. It's kind of weird, which triggers the door mechanism to lock, and so they're able to lock the raptor out of the room. But this isn't a permanent solution. They have to still leave the control room because the raptor eventually does get in and they escape through the ceiling and then make their way outside to the main atrium of the building. And as they are in the main atrium about to make their escape, the raptor, I believe from the fridge, it's not, I don't they all look the same, so I'm not sure if it's the same raptor, but I'm going to guess it's the same raptor. The raptor from the fridge corners them, and so does the raptor, I believe, from the control room. And so just at the last minute, as the raptor is about to go and attack, I believe, Dr. Grant, the T-Rex comes in and literally grabs the raptor and X's it, which makes the other raptor go and attack the T-Rex, and this sort of kerfuffle allows the group to escape to the cars. And as they are running down the stairs of the building, John Hammond and Dr. Malcolm pull up with a car. They all get into the car. There's a scene as Dr. Grant is getting in the car and he's telling John Hammond, after thorough review, I do not approve this park opening. And John Hammond at this point has finally come to his senses and is like, I completely agree. And they make their way to the helicopter and get on the helicopter, and there's this cute scene where this guy, Dr. Grant, who didn't like kids, he's now hugging on these kids, and they're all sleeping together, and it's all cute and nice and fun. And that's basically where our movie ends, them escaping the island. I genuinely enjoyed this movie. I really like the back and forth elements. And I think this back and forth element is something that continues throughout all the Jurassic movies. So when I say team, gang, group, there's a lot of gangs and groups and teams that formulate throughout all these movies. So keep that in mind. But overall, I would definitely have to say, taking the fact of the time period out of it, I would put this movie at the number 2 spot. I know I said this in the last video, but I still think it is too early to put something at number 1. Even though I get to revise my ranking, I also at this point think there is another movie I like a bit more than this one, but I'm not sure. So I'm going to put this at 2. Next is Jurassic Park Lost World, and it came out in 1997. So this movie takes place the first movie takes place on Isla Nublar. This movie takes place on Isla Sorna, which is Jurassic Park, its sister island. And this park was not meant for guests. It doesn't have facilities that are meant to entertain guests or anything like that. This was more so an island where the dinosaurs could live and the researchers could observe them. So just keep that in mind for the entire movie. This video, we are going to be jumping back from Isla Nublar and Isla Sorna. So there's a little beginning part of the movie where these parents and their child have docked on Isla Sorna for some reason. I don't know how they gained access to this island. I don't think it was legally, honestly. Their daughter gets attacked by the little ones that go in a group. For some reason, I don't have their name written down. Because John is getting older, this kind of takes the power out of his hand. It's like his company, people within his company are like, you're getting old, you allowed this to happen, we're going to take control of the reins, type of thing. John summons Dr. Malcolm to his house. John reveals to Dr. Malcolm that he wants to preserve Isla Sorna. He doesn't want it to be touched by humans. He just wants the dinosaurs to be able to live there in peace. And he has recruited a team to basically study and document the dinosaurs, take photos, and prove to whoever he needs to prove to that these dinosaurs should be left in peace. And he wants Dr. Malcolm to be on the team. And Dr. Malcolm is like, no, I'm not going back to these islands ever again. I don't even know why you would even ask me that question. But he tries to persuade him by saying, that you're not going to be alone. You're not going to be really near the dinosaurs. You're going to be observing. You're not touching them. And the people on the team are Nick Van Owen. He's a photographer. Eddie Carr. He is a field equipment expert. And the last person that actually piques Dr. Malcolm's interest is Sarah Harding, who is a paleontologist. And like I was saying, Dr. Malcolm is declining this invitation until he finds out that Sarah Harding is going to be a part of the team and is actually already on the island. And Sarah Harding, who I would just be calling Sarah for the rest of this movie, is his girlfriend. So that's what basically persuades him to go to this island, to go and save her. Because even though John is saying everything's going to be fine, John said everything was going to be fine last time, there's no guarantee it's probably going to end badly like it did last time, or at least this is what Dr. Malcolm is thinking. So he's going to the island as the 4th person on the team, which, hey, John got his way, so he's happy. And as Dr. Malcolm is gearing up with Nick and with Eddie to go to the island, because Sarah is there by herself at this point, we meet Kelly, who is one of my favorite characters. Even though this is the only movie she's ever seen in, she's one of my favorite characters throughout the entire series. Call me biased, but first time ever seeing this movie and seeing a little black girl who does gymnastics, which I used to do, excited me as an actor. It just let me know that, or gave me hope that I could be in a major action series like Kelly when I grew up. And it made me really, really happy to see representation in the Jurassic Park movies, because representation matters. So yeah, she's my favorite character till this day. But she is Dr. Malcolm's daughter, and Dr. Malcolm was supposed to be spending time with her, and obviously he kind of tells her, I can't do that right now. I have to go and do this, which doesn't make Kelly feel happy. Obviously, she was looking forward to spending time with her dad, and she said he has a track record of doing this. It's just a whole lot of problems. But she eventually, they have a little bit of an argument. He walks away from her. She wanders onto one of the research vehicles that is going to be heading towards the island. And skipping forward, Dr. Malcolm, Eddie, and Nick make it to the island. They don't know that Kelly is on one of the research vehicles. They haven't discovered her in the vehicle yet, but as they're on the island, Dr. Malcolm is looking for Sarah, and he finds her. She is, I think, laying on the ground taking pictures of some dinos, getting close, really giddy, petting them, almost getting eaten by one because she decided to pet their child. And Dr. Malcolm is just kind of like, because he knows how terrible it's going to get through this entire thing. Nick and Eddie are just like, oh, it's fine, we're going to do our work and be done with it. And Dr. Malcolm is like, have you written your obituary yet? Have you said goodbye to your parents? Have you told your loved ones that you love them? And they're kind of not taking him seriously. But eventually they head back to camp because they notice smoke coming from their base camp, and that is where they find Kelly. And obviously Dr. Malcolm is not happy about the fact that his daughter is now on this island, and so he is trying to now get his daughter and his girlfriend off the island as soon as possible. But as they are kind of having this argument, they see these helicopters kind of fly by them, which end up being InGen helicopters. Our team of 5 at this point, go and investigate what InGen is doing on this island, because they're like, John didn't tell us that, or at least some of them are like, John didn't tell us that they were going to be there. It seems like Nick knew they were coming. Basically, find out that InGen is there to capture and transport dinosaurs off the island, which this is something I should say happens later in the series as well. So if you hear it come up again, just remember they are not for that. So what they end up doing is going down to InGen's base camp, and as the main guy, who is, I believe, taking over for John, he's on the island as well. He is basically giving a presentation to investors saying that what we want to do is take these animals off this island and put them into zoos, kind of like SeaWorld, a mixture of, he said, a zoo and SeaWorld and different things like that, so people could come in. We want it to be in San Diego. And as that is happening, Nick and Sarah are opening the different cages that the animals are being held in. And so the animals who have been loose end up trashing the InGen base camp, destroying their materials, their setup, everything like that. And as this is happening, I would say the main leader of InGen's camp, I would call him a poacher because that's kind of how he acts. He is on this island not only for the money, but also because he has a dream of getting a T-Rex tooth. And so as the little presentation is happening, he goes and finds a T-Rex nest. He steals the baby, holds the baby down, and uses the baby as a bait to bring one of the T-Rexes back to him. And so Nick and Sarah take the baby T-Rex out of this trap and take the baby T-Rex back to their research vehicle because its leg was broken. As they are coming into the research vehicle with the T-Rex, Kelly starts to freak out, and she's like, you know what? I'm in too deep. I shouldn't have come to this island. What y'all doing is crazy. I need to be somewhere safe. So Dr. Malcolm, Kelly, and Eddie go into what is called the lookout tower. It was one of their equipment that they brought to basically look at dinosaurs from a safe distance, and it's kind of, I think, above the tree line. So Dr. Malcolm, Eddie, and Kelly are in the lookout. Sarah and Nick, I'm sorry if I'm going slow. I'm just trying to get all these names correctly. They are in the research vehicle treating the baby, and from the lookout tower, Dr. Malcolm sees something moving in the forest, and he leaves the lookout tower to go and warn Sarah and Nick that the T-Rex is coming for its baby. And so as the T-Rex is looking around the research vehicle, Sarah kindly pushes the baby T-Rex back to the parents, and they leave for now. And what ends up happening is this whole sequence, but to kind of sum it up in less terms, Dr. Malcolm, Sarah, and Nick get stuck in the research vehicle as the T-Rex comes back to basically get revenge on them stealing their baby. It pushes the research vehicle off the side of a cliff, but the research vehicle is kind of made up of like two different like, let's say, kind of look like train cars put together by a little thing in the center. And so upon seeing this, Eddie leaves the lookout tower and leaves Kelly alone up there. He helps try to get them out, throwing them a rope and attaching the research vehicle to the car to give them enough time to climb up. And throughout this entire sequence, eventually Eddie does get eaten by one of the T-Rexes. Actually, both of them. They kind of do a little toss back and forth. You take the legs, I take the torso type of thing. And then Nick, Sarah, and Dr. Malcolm do eventually make it out of the research vehicle. They are on the edge of the cliff. The reason they are able to get back to safety is because the InGen crew has found their base camp and helps them back. The InGen team is like, look, we don't have any more equipment or materials. Y'all don't have any more equipment or materials. Why don't we just join up together, join forces, make it inland? Because there are research buildings, because this was a research island. Let's call for help and let's get out of here. So they're like, cool. Obviously, at this point, Kelly is down from the lookout. And we have a little scene of them going through the woods. I don't know if you noticed, but I just kind of like, I say every single death shown on screen, so let's do a little side story here. One of the InGen, I would say, I'll just call them soldiers, he goes off for a bathroom break. His friend was supposed to be watching him, but his friend has his earphones on and is in his own world. And earlier on in the movie, he ends up zapping, I believe they're called compies in the movie, right? That's their nickname. But he ends up zapping a compy earlier on in the movie, kind of solidifying himself as a butthole. And so at this point, as he's going to use the bathroom, he comes in contact with another compy and he kind of shoos them away. But eventually, by the end of the scene, what happens is he gets attacked by them and he gets X'd. And they do try to go back for him. Some of the team members, like the team lead, tries to go back for him as the rest of the group has settled down for the night, but they really only find his remains. And so now, like I said, the team has made a camp to settle down for the night. And what ends up happening is the T-Rex comes up and upon their camp, because Sarah was wearing her shirt that still had the baby T-Rex blood on it. And so the T-Rex ends up attacking the camp, Xing quite a few of the team members. And at this point during this scene, they kind of get broken up. The InGen soldiers end up running into this field, and Sarah, Nick, and Kelly are kind of trapped. Not trapped, but they got behind this waterfall to basically escape the T-Rex. So remember that. Dr. Malcolm is back with the leader of the InGen team. He's in a different place. He's not relevant for what I'm about to say next, but I just want to tell you he's not in here. So as the InGen soldiers are running through the tall grass, one of them is like, we shouldn't be running through this tall grass. And he was correct, because as they're running through the grass, they are getting basically annihilated by raptors, all of them, to the point where it was a big group of them. And by the end of the movie, I would say there's only about like a good two, three of them left. That being the leader, who was not running through the raptor field, and the other guy who I believe also stayed behind. I forgot to say that. But eventually, Dr. Malcolm does join Nick, Sarah, and Kelly to make our team of four. The InGen leader and the other guy are back, and I'll come back to them. But our team of four make it. They also run through the tall grass, but are not attacked by raptors. Nick goes ahead to the research building on the island to contact people for help. But before the rest of our team of four can make their way inside the building, they end up getting ambushed by raptors. And this scene in the movie is very cool. Obviously, none of them end up Xing. I just mention it because I think there's this cool, where something is mentioned in the beginning of the movie and becomes relevant at the end. In the first Jurassic Park, with the kids being that it's early mentioned on that Lex is a hacker. In this movie, it's mentioned early on that Kelly is a gymnast, so that becomes relevant towards the end of the movie, and that is one of the big reasons she is able to escape the raptors. Just wanted to say that. But Nick was able to call for help, and they are all helicoptered off the island. All our team of four is get into a helicopter and brought off the island. And then switching over back, because if you remember, I said the InGen leader and the guy who works for Hammond or is overheading Hammond's operation, what ends up happening is the guy is able to capture one of the T-Rexes and also capture the kid. And so they're transported off the island, just them two. All the rest of the animals, I believe, are not, but they are able to capture the T-Rex baby and the T-Rex. And so as our main team is in the helicopter, they see this, and then Dr. Malcolm and Sarah know that their work is not over with. And so, skipping forward a little bit, Hammond's leaderhead, who will now have a name, because now I have his name. Only reason I wasn't mentioning it is because I guess I missed it early on in the movie, but I have it now. His name is Mr. Ludlow. Mr. Ludlow, John Hammond's successor. Skipping forward, we are now in San Diego. He's at the dock. He's giving a speech to the crowd, being like, look, we got some good cargo coming. We can still open the park. You guys can invest. And skipping forward a little bit more, as the boat is coming in, they notice that the boat is coming in really, really fast. They don't understand why, but eventually the boat crashes into the dock, and we find out that somehow, some way, all the crew has been X'd. The reason I'm a bit confused as to how this happened is because the T-Rex is in the cargo hold of the ship. So maybe the baby was able to get out. They don't have, or at least from my recollection, they don't have any other dinosaurs besides the baby T-Rex and the adult T-Rex on the boat. So I don't know how the rest of them, how the crew gets X'd, but that can be my only hypothesis, is that the baby got out and X'd everyone. But as they are trying to escape the chaos, someone, I don't completely remember who, I think it's Ludlow, opens the cargo hold that is holding the adult T-Rex, allowing the adult T-Rex to get out and start to travel on mainland San Diego. Actually, it couldn't have been the baby. The baby was captured and taken to this facility. So I'm not actually sure how the boat team gets X'd. It'll be a mystery for the end of time. But anyways, at this point, Sarah and Dr. Malcolm now have to save the baby and get the adult T-Rex back to the cargo hold, which the plan that they devise is what happened last time, to use the baby to get the adult T-Rex back on the ship. So they go to the facility that Mr. Ludlow was building for his zoo Sea World park. They steal the baby, and then they use the baby's calls to lure the adult T-Rex, who at this point has been running amok in San Diego, eating people, causing havoc. And so they are able to use the baby T-Rex. Y'all, y'all, the power literally went out. I know y'all saw. So beyond that, I'm gonna finish. I don't know where I left off. But let me finish this movie, and then I'm going to take a break, because clearly I need to take a break. Dr. Malcolm and Sarah are able to get the adult T-Rex back in the cargo hold with the baby, but Mr. Ludlow does not like this. So he kind of, before they are able to get the adult T-Rex back in, Mr. Ludlow goes in to try to steal the baby T-Rex again. But at that point, that is when the adult T-Rex is now walking in, and they close the cargo hold. He's not able to get out. They don't know he's in there at this point. And so this segment I'm gonna just continue. This segment of the movie ends with Mr. Ludlow getting attacked and eaten by the baby T-Rex. The whole movie ends with Kelly sitting on the couch with Sarah and Dr. Malcolm. Dr. Malcolm and Sarah are asleep, and Kelly watches the TV. And on the TV, she just sees the news about the T-Rex and everything that happened the night before, and the movie ends. This, I think, by far is one of my favorite Jurassic Park movies. Again, I absolutely love Kelly, but beyond Kelly, I really love the story of it being the second one. This is the first time in the series that we see an adult T-Rex make it to mainland. I'm sorry, I'm still just stunned by what just happened, and I'm not sure it's going to happen again. But I would definitely have to put this at I'm gonna put it at the number one spot. I think this is definitely one of my favorite Jurassic Park movies. Hi everyone, so it is a few hours later. It might have just been 2 seconds for you, but I can already tell by the time it is that this video is going to be out a day late, so I'm sorry about that, but let's get back into the movies. The next movie is Jurassic Park 3, and that one came out in 2001, which I was actually surprised about because I thought all the Jurassic Park movies came out in the 90s, but came out in 2001. So this movie starts out with a young boy, and what we find out to be his stepdad, I think it's called paragliding. It's where you are attached to a boat, and you're attached to a string. This is the boat right here, right? And you're attached to a string, and you're strapped in, and there's a little parachute, and you're the boat's moving, and so you're kind of floating. I believe it's called paragliding. I will correct myself if I'm wrong, but I believe that is what it's called. As they are paragliding, they start to reach rough air, and as they look back down, they notice that the boat is torn up and there is no one on the boat. All the crew is basically gone. So what they do is the stepdad dislodges them from the boat because the boat is about to crash into a rock, and they basically have to paraglide to the island. Now, what island is this? The island of Isla Sorna, which, if you remember from the last movie, is the sister island of Isla Nublar. That's just full of dinosaurs. Then we cut back to a Dr. Grant playing with Dr. Sattler's kids. And I mean, this scene is mainly to kind of show us that, first of all, Dr. Grant and Dr. Sattler didn't end up together. They're living different lives, and Dr. Sattler has kids now. Then we are introduced to Billy Brennan, and I'll just be calling him Billy from now on. Billy is basically Dr. Grant's like student, and they are both approached by a man called Paul Kirby. And Paul Kirby basically takes them to dinner and proposes to them. You know, he says him and his wife are just travelers. They love going to places, they love going to weird places, and they want to take a ride over Isla Sorna. That because of how much money they have been able to get the green light to fly down closer than a lot of planes are able to go, and they want Dr. Sattler to basically be their tour guide as they are taking a tour of Isla Sorna. Dr. Grant obviously does not want to go back to either or any of these islands by any way, shape, or form, but like in the first movie, he is persuaded by the fact that Paul Kirby promises him that he will get a big sum of money if he, shows them around. They basically head out. It's Paul Kirby, his wife, Amanda Kirby, Bill, Dr. Grant, and then a crew that Paul Kirby, which I will just call him Paul or Mr. Kirby, has set up. I think the first red flag that we as the viewing audience get is that as they're flying down into Isla Sorna, we can hear over the radio saying, hey, you guys need to fly up, you're in restricted air. But the crew just turns that off and continues on to the island. And the first red flag that Dr. Grant gets is that as he is giving the tour saying, oh, on your right, here is the Dilophosaurus, yada, 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 it seems like the Kirbys aren't paying attention to him. They're not interested in what he has to say. They're looking and they're saying, do you see anything? I don't see anything. And Dr. Grant is confused because he's like, there's dinosaurs right here. What do you mean you don't see it? You don't see them. They're whole herds of them. And then I believe one of the crew mentions landing the plane. And at this point, Dr. Grant is like, no, we're not landing the plane. That's not what's going to happen. He gets up because he's kind of like, what is happening? And then he gets knocked out. When he wakes up, he is awoken. He's on the floor. Billy is standing over him, basically like, are you okay? And the plane has landed. In the distance, because the plane door is open, they can hear Amanda Kirby, which I'll just call Mrs. Kirby or Amanda, is yelling out names. She's yelling out the names Eric and Ben into the forest. She's also doing it through a megaphone, by the way. The crew that they brought along, it's 3 men, also are in the forest searching for, I guess at this point, I mean, we as the audience can infer that they are searching for Eric and Ben. Dr. Grant advises Mrs. Kirby to not yell into the forest as she is through a megaphone, as that can attract a bunch of animals. And not soon afterwards, the 3-man crew that were flying the plane runs out of the forest. Well, 2 out of the 3 of them run out of the forest, seemingly because they saw something that they definitely didn't want to see. They basically tell everyone to rush back onto the plane, so everyone rushes back onto the plane. They're kind of like, where's the third guy? Where's the third guy? And they're like, he's fine. He's coming. And as they are going down the runway, they're about to take off. The third guy runs onto the runway, and before they're like, he runs on, and the plane does this. And as he runs on the runway, so does a dinosaur who X's him, and they're about to be completely airborne, but I believe the bottom of the plane like skims the dinosaur in a way that throws them off course. And so instead of flying upwards and out, they basically fly sideways and into the jungle, and the plane crashes in the jungle. So after the plane crash, you think they would be safe. No, the dinosaur that attacked the first man starts attacking the plane. He rips off the front. He ends up Xing another one of the crew members in the process. The plane tumbles to the ground because it landed in a tree. And in this kerfuffle, the rest of the remaining team will say Mrs. Kirby, Mr. Kirby, Billy, Dr. Grant, and a one of the last of the three crew members run into the forest, and they still are not safe as this dinosaur is after them. And as they run into the forest, they run into this one spot where they think they're safe, but then they just run into a T-Rex. So then they run back the other direction, and then they run into the same original dino, which I will now say is a Spinosaurus, is what they run into. The two end up fighting, the two dinosaurs, the Spinosaurus and the T-Rex, and the Spinosaurus ends up winning. I think as an audience, we're meant to interpret this as, in this movie, the T-Rex is not the big bad, the Spinosaurus is. Because they are able to run away as the dinosaurs are fighting, they're able to gather a bit of safety and figure out what is going on. 3 out of the 5 people in the group know what's going on, and that doesn't include Dr. Grant or Billy. The Kirbys basically explained to Dr. Grant and Billy that they came to this island because they were looking for their son named Eric. He crashed on the island, I believe it was 8 weeks ago. I was about to say 8 months. 8 weeks ago, and has been here. They are looking for Ben, who is his stepdad, who at this point we still don't know is their stepdad. I'm just saying it now just in case I forget to say it later. They were, like I said in the beginning, paragliding, and they crashed onto the island. And the reason that they brought Dr. Grant along is because the lasting crew member of the 3, who ends up being the lead crew member, said that you should get someone who knows the island. And as the Kirbys say this to Dr. Grant, the crew member interjects and he's like, I didn't mean for you to kidnap them, because he didn't know that they didn't know what was going on, right? And Billy points out the fact that Dr. Grant has never been to Isla Sorna, right? He was there for the events of Jurassic Park, which happened on Isla Nublar, which I think is just kind of like a bit, not irony, but it's not funny either. It's just kind of like, dang, you drag this man out into one of the most dangerous places in the world because you thought he knew where he was going, but he's never even been here. He is just as lost here as you guys are, and he doesn't know where to go because he's never been here. And at this point, you know, the Kirbys admit to the fact that they are not millionaires. They do not have the amount of money that they promised Dr. Grant that they were going to pay him. They actually work in a mall in, like, I believe, I'm not even going to guess which state. I forgot to write it down, but they work in a mall in like a place like Ohio, Kentucky, or Kansas. None of those, I don't think any of those states are the actual states they originate from, but just that type of vibe, if you know what I'm talking about when it comes to the states. And so obviously Dr. Grant and Billy are mad about this, but they just say, you know what, at this point, we're stranded. We need to survive. We need to get help. So Dr. Grant says, me and Billy are heading to the coast. You're welcome to come, or you're not. Because after Dr. Grant hears him say that Eric and Ben have been on this island for 8 weeks, he practically assumes that they have already not made it. As they are making their way through the jungle, they end up coming across the parasailing gear, and they find a video camera that lets them know Eric was able to get down. And not soon after, they find the body of Ben, which helps them to realize that, you know, Eric is on the island alone, and he's not on the island with Ben as they once perceived he was. Ben is, I'm not sure if him and Mrs. Kirby were actually married, but he was with Miss Kirby. So obviously Mrs. Kirby is distraught about this because the man she was with, she just found his body. And so she kind of runs off in a bit of a frenzy. Mr. Kirby goes after her, and that prompts the rest of the crew to kind of follow them, and they end up running into the middle of a raptor's nest. There's no raptors there at this point in time. It's just full of eggs. And you know, they don't want to stay there too long, so they kind of just keep it moving, but for some reason Billy was lagging behind, so that prompted Dr. Grant to stop, and he's like, "You good?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm fine." Going further along, they do run into one of the old scientific buildings. If you remember from the last movie, it's been hours for me, so if I'm repeating myself, I'm sorry. But you know, Isla Sorna was just a research. So they have a bunch of research buildings, and they run into the research building, and they get attacked in the research building by raptors. They don't understand why, but they're probably assuming because they are in raptor territory, that is why they're being attacked by raptors. The raptors end up Xing the last member of the 3-man crew in a very, very, I would say, evil way. I feel like this is one of the first movies where we are seeing the more of the smarts of the raptors. The series is getting into how tactical they really are. As we're going through the movie, Dr. Grant is also raving about how smart they are. And in this raptor fight, I should say that Dr. Grant was not with the group. He kind of got separated from the group. And as he is about to get X'd by the raptors, he's kind of just surrounded by smoke and then led somewhere. And we find out that Eric, the little boy, saved him and has been living on the island by himself for the last 8 weeks. He was staying in kind of like this little, I would call it like a little, not a safe room. You know, when there's storms and you have those little areas that you go to be safe from the storm. I just can't think of it off the top of my head right now, but that kind of looks like where he was staying in. It was like kind of below ground. There's a little porthole that you could crawl into. And our other group that now consists of Billy and Mr. and Mrs. Kirby are kind of like, trying to figure out where to go from here as they have lost Dr. Grant, don't know where he is, and they just saw the last of the 3 crew members get X'd. But that doesn't really last for long, as after their night sleep, a few things happen and they are joined together. Eric hears a phone ringing in the distance and he recognizes it as his father's ringtone. So he runs and he meets and is reunited with both of his parents. And that also, Dr. Grant is reunited with Billy, and our team of 5 again, our gang of 5 again, is reunited. See, it's always either like 5 or 4 main people in each Jurassic Park movie. Is interesting. This reuniting doesn't last for long, as Mr. Kirby does not have his phone, and so they realize that the phone was ringing from the stomach of the Spinosaurus, who they all again run from. They eventually get away, running into another one of the research buildings, but at this point, since they're reunited, Billy is trying to get back his little satchel that Dr. Grant has been carrying, and Dr. Grant is like, I'm fine, I'm good to hold it, and Billy is kind of like insisting that Dr. Grant give it back to him, and that prompts Dr. Grant to look into the bag. In the bag, he sees that Billy has stolen 2 raptor eggs, and that kind of, obviously Dr. Grant is disappointed, but he's like, oh, this is why the raptors have been chasing us, because you stole 2 of their eggs. The reason Billy did it was because, after finding out that Mr. Kirby was not going to be able to pay them or pay for their research like he said he would, he thought he could sell the 2 raptor eggs to have enough money to fund their research. I mean, he did it in good faith, but is doing something in good faith worth your life? You let me know. Then right after this, the gang make it to the coast, but they end up running into a pterodactyl pin, and in this entire sequence, they are able to make it out, but Billy basically sacrifices himself in the end to save Eric in the whole sequence. And so now our gang of 5 is taken down to 4, that being Dr. Grant, Eric, and Mr. and Mrs. Kirby. As they are able to make it to a boat on the river, they do come across mounds of poop where they hear the satellite phone ringing. So they stop the boat, get out, and dig through the mounds of poop and find the satellite phone that the Spinosaurus pooped out. And so this gives them the ability to call someone on mainland to be able to, get help finally. And then at this point, they get back on the boat, and as they're sailing down the river, their boat gets attacked by the Spinosaurus again. She keeps coming at them. Throughout the entire sequence, Dr. Grant is able to make one phone call to Dr. Sattler. He isn't able to say much to her because at this point, they are stuck in a cage that they were using to keep the Spinosaurus out, and the cage is sinking slowly into the water, so is the boat. So he's really only able to get out to word. His words are the river, site B. That is all he's able to say to her, and hopefully able to, in his mind, get what he's talking about through that. The way they are able to swim out of the boat and the way that they are able to get away from the Spinosaurus is because the boat engine was leaking, because it was bitten by the Spinosaurus. There's fire in the water, and the Spinosaurus runs away because of the fire. Now they're back in the forest. It is a new day, and they get surrounded by all sides. Surrounded in all sides? By all sides? I'll find it. On all sides. I know English. They get surrounded on all sides by raptors, and there's this kind of like this scene where Mrs. Kirby kind of has to bow down to the raptor and give the 2 eggs up. And so in the end, the raptors end up taking the eggs back and sparing them, because that's all they really wanted, I guess. And at this point, they are able to make their way back to the beach, and rescue is waiting there. And so they get on these helicopters, and to their surprise, injured Billy, who they thought at this point had been X'd, he is on the helicopter, and so end of the movie, they make their way home and the main gang of five is safe. So I really do enjoy this movie. I liked a new dinosaur being the big bad. As I mentioned earlier, I liked how we got to see a different side of the raptors. We got to see how much more smart they are, which I think really sets them up for different parts of the season. I think it was interesting that they changed their look in Jurassic Park 3 compared to 1 and 2. I think rewatching it again and knowing that what Mr. Kirby did was absolutely messed up. I just think that part is crazy because like you really was selling this man lies, put his life in jeopardy because you knew you were going to land the plane on the island. You thought nothing was going to go wrong, but you knew. You put two people who weren't aware of the danger in danger, promising them money and not being able to guarantee it. I would just be interested in to know what happened after the film because he said no, I can't pay you in money, but if you need a floor done, I can help you. He doesn't want a floor done. He clearly agreed to this for the money. But anyways, I think I will put this one at I think I will put it at the number 5 spot for now. I think it's a good one, but I'm literally trying to find the page. Multitasking. It's a good one, but it's definitely compared to the other two before it. I wouldn't say it's my one of my top favorites. So it is going in the number 4 spot. Our next movie is Jurassic World, which came out in 2015. I forgot about that. Anyways, getting into the start of the action in the movie, we are introduced to two kids packing up to go to Jurassic World. Their names are Gray and Zach. When we first meet Gray, we are supposed to be given the impression that he's the smart one, and Zach is supposed to be kind of like this angsty teen. But they are both flown out to Isla Nublar. If you remember, that is the island that Jurassic Park was also on, and they built Jurassic World on the same exact park. We're kind of given the impression in the airport that the parents are not on good terms, but I will come back to that later. As they land on the park, they thought they would be meeting their aunt, who they're supposed to be kind of staying with. Their aunt works on the island. Her name is Claire, but instead they meet her assistant named Zara. This is kind of like the first time that they're kind of like, when they get to the island, but they go with it because they kind of have to. Also, Claire is the mother's sister. Next, we are introduced to Claire, and now the title of her job, I'm not really sure of, but I think, I don't know if she's like assistant or VP. I can't really say that. I don't think it's even explicitly said in the movie, but from how she operates and what she's able to do, we can tell she kind of has a high position because she has access to things like the control room. She has access to the CEO of the island, which his name is Mr. Misirani, I believe is how you pronounce it. She is able to talk to investors on and not coach them but give them speeches on what they would be investing in on the park, and she's really successful at her job. She is just the rich hardworking auntie basically. And also from these impressions, she's not really concerned with the animals. She's just kind of like, this is what we are selling to people basically. She does eventually come across Zach and Gray as well, and through their interaction you can kind of tell that she doesn't really keep in touch with them or visit her family that much. Like I said, she's a hardworking woman. Like she kind of makes this comment about like, how old are you now, or like how long has it been, because you've grown up to so much to Zach, and Zach is like 7 years. It's been 7 years. And she's like, oh. But after that, we are introduced to Mr. Misirani, is how they pronounce it. And again, like I said, he is the CEO. And I think he is just as kind of delulu about the park as Hammond. And I just wanted to say that because it comes into play later. Also, when Claire is talking to Mr. Misirani, he is, I think, 2 days out from getting his pilot license. And so they kind of fly around the park, and he's kind of like, are the animals happy? And Claire's like, I don't know how to measure whether or not the animals are happy, sir. And he's like, well, yes, you can. Look into their eyes and you can see whether they're happy or not. And she's like, anyways, the numbers are up today. And that's just, it's a funny interaction to me. And this is also the first time we hear about the Indominus Rex. And we are kind of getting hints as to what this animal is. We don't really get to see it yet, but we're like, in the first talks about the Indominus Rex, we're hearing things like it's bigger than expected, it's smarter, it ate its sibling, it tried to break out of the enclosure. And Claire is seeing this all as things, not as warning flags or red flags. She's basically seeing as oh, just different things that come with the animal and different setbacks that have just kind of happened. And that's what prompts Mr. Mizrahi to basically be like, can we get someone to check to make sure that we have the proper security in place to house this animal? And he's like, I want you to go and get Owen Grady. He's ex-Navy, and have him go and check this paddock to make sure it is secure enough to house this animal. And by Mr. Mizrahi mentioning Owen Grady, we can clearly tell from her reaction that Claire has history with him, which we end up finding out later that at one point in time they did date. So they do have a bit of history. And it didn't go well. Then at this point, remember I said it keeps jumping around. So I'm sorry if it seems like I'm jumping around. We are introduced to Owen. Owen is in charge of the Raptors. He is in charge of 4 Raptors. He's the alpha of the Raptors. The Raptors' names are Charlie, Blue, Delta, and Echo. I think it is established that Blue is basically like second in command to him. But yeah, as he is running a Raptor drill, is basically what I'll call it. The drill goes well, and he is also being spectated by this man named Hoskins. Hoskin basically, after seeing this drill, gets excited and he wants to use the Raptors, or he has plans in the future and wants to use the Raptors in war. He wants them to kind of be like war dogs, but more ferocious, and he thinks it's a really good idea. And Owen is like, no, you can't just do that. He makes I believe a comment saying, yeah, they might be good in war, but what happens when you don't feed them? They're going to eat the members, eat the rest of the soldiers. But Hoskins is still gun-ho about the idea. He also works for InGen, by the way. Going back to Zach and Gray, they're basically enjoying the park without their aunt. They do have premium passes, so they're seeing things like the Mosasaurus feeding, the T-Rex feeding, riding rides and having fun. And at a certain point in the day, they decide to run away from Zara. And so, they run away from Zara and end up getting on the gyrosphere. The gyrosphere ride is basically kind of like them in this snow globe looking ball, and it allows them to kind of cruise through different herbivores or herbivores. I don't know. I've been told I say the word incorrectly, but it lets them cruise through there. So just remember they are out in Herbivore Valley. And then we cut back to Claire and Owen. They're kind of like having this weird conversation because obviously they do have a bit of history and it didn't go well. And Claire is trying to be professional, and Owen is like, we know each other. Why are you calling me Mr. Grady? And at the end of the conversation, she basically is like, I need you to come and check the Indominus Rex paddock. I don't want you to, but Mr. Mizrahi does. So we gotta go. And skipping forward a little bit, basically what happens is they go and check the Indominus Rex paddock, and for some reason, as of right now, they believe that the Indominus Rex is not in the paddock, which prompts Owen and 2 of the workers to go inside the paddock and see what's happened. They believe that the Indominus Rex has escaped, but through the control room, this is where Claire is at this point, because she went back to the control room after they said that the Indominus Rex was gone. They realized that no, she's in there. The Indominus Rex is in the paddock, and so are these 3 crew members. And so at this point, everyone is panicking in the control room, not in the paddock. But the 3 men, basically, one of them puts in a key code to open this like big garage door looking thing. One of the crew members gets X'd. The Owen and the other crew member are able to make it out, but so is the Indominus Rex. They hide behind cars. Owen hides under a car, and the other guy hides in front of the car. That crew member also gets X'd by the Indominus Rex. The only reason Owen was able to survive is because he cut the car's fuel line, I believe. I don't know a lot about cars. And sprayed himself with gas. And this is just side note. My thing is like, wouldn't he smell like gas the entire movie? Wouldn't he just, like, the minute he walks up to people, it's like basically smelling like you just whiffed an entire like gallon of gas. And I just think that's, it's funny for me to think about, because obviously it's movie magic, so they're not going to even reference that. But in real life, every time this man walked up to anybody throughout the rest of the duration of the movie, he straight up smells like gas. Anyways, now that the Indominus Rex is out, it goes around the park to every employee. Hoskins ends up calling the rest of InGen because he has kind of like a plan, but more on that later. The control room puts into place the protocol for if an animal gets out of their enclosure. AC, I believe that's the correct acronym, is called in. It stands for asset containment. I'll just call them the asset containment team because I don't think I actually got down the right acronym. Something in my soul is telling me that's not correct. But asset containment is called in to basically contain the asset, that being the Indominus Rex, and they're told to do this using non-lethals. Now, if you don't know what not non-lethals are, it's basically like they don't have the pew pews. They have things like nets, tasers, and sedation darts to catch this really, really big dinosaur. And Owen is like, this is not going to work. How big the dinosaur is, what kind of dinosaur it is, how she was raised, that is just not a smart idea. But they're like, we have $60 million invested in this animal. We're not just gonna downright, put bullets in it. But obviously, this does not end up working well. I believe I counted there was 8 members on the asset containment team. The Indominus basically annihilates all of them easy. Like that was just a snack for her at that point. In this scene, we also find out that she's kind of smart because she took out her neck chip that was implanted a long time ago. She knew where it was and she took it out, so they are not able to track her that way anymore. And that she can camouflage. So she has features that were not told to people like Owen or people like Claire or any of them. And that's what prompts this scene between Mr. Mizrahi and Dr. Wu, if you remember from the first movie. And it's a interesting exchange because Dr. Wu is kind of like, you just told me to give it more teeth, and that's what I did. And I had to use different DNA from different animals to be able to do that. So even at this point, even though the Indominus is out and it has X'd a bunch of people at this point, they have still not shut down the park. What they've only done is shut down a section of the park to kind of get people away from the path that the Indominus is on. But if you remember what I said earlier, that Zack and Gray are in the gyrosphere, which was in the valley that the Indominus was heading to. And that's where we get this scene where Zack decides to take them off-roading and they run straight into the Indominus, which attacks them. The only way they're able to survive is because not only do they get out of the gyrosphere, but they jump over into a waterfall and hide under the water so the Indominus cannot see them as she's looking down into the water. And so at this point, Zack and Gray, like Tim and Lex in the beginning of the movie, they have to travel through the forest of Jurassic Park to get back to safety. Claire, realizing that she also had another responsibility, that being her sister's kids, she finds out that they were in Gyrosphere Valley, which is the path of the Indominus Rex, and she enlists Owen and is like, hey, can you help me go get my nephews? And basically, side note, we get this scene with Claire and Owen that mirrors the Triceratops scene from the first movie. So yeah, I kind of wanted to mention that. I did not write down the name of the long-necked dinosaur for some reason, but it's with the long-necked dinosaur in Jurassic World, not the Triceratops. Next, Claire and Owen do head into the forest, realizing that Zack and Gray had to head more into the forest to escape the Indominus. So now Claire and Owen are on the same path trying to find Zack and Gray, which, switching back to Zack and Gray, they end up finding one of the original Jurassic Park buildings. Obviously, at this point, it is overgrown and run down, but they come across a Jeep and they end up fixing the Jeep and using it to head back to the main park to get to safety. Kind of unclear what building this is in the original movie. I first theorized that it was the cafeteria building, but I don't think it is. I think it might be a different building. I'm not sure. I have a theory it's the cafeteria building, but then again, that might not be correct, so don't hold me to that. Then we switch back to Hoskins telling Mr. Mizrahi that they can use the raptors to get to the Indominus, to find the Indominus, because at this point they can't track her anymore. And Mr. Mizrahi is like, no, I'm not putting any more dinosaurs out in my park to just roam around free. And so that prompts Mr. Mizrahi to kind of take things into his own hands. And like I said, he knows how to fly a helicopter. He is 2 days out from being able to actually supposed legally be able to fly by himself. But this doesn't stop him from getting in the helicopter with two, I believe, military people. I was going to say what branch, but I forgot. I did not write it down. And basically what ends up happening is that the military people, they find the Indominus. They pew pew at the Indominus, which as the Indominus is trying to escape being pew pewed, it runs straight into the pterodactyl dome enclosure. And that prompts all the pterodactyls to be able to fly out because now they have an opening to fly out, and they end up Xing both the military men and running into the wings of the helicopter, which make it crash into the dome, also Xing Mr. Mizrahi. And now that all the pterodactyls fly into the main part of the park, attacking people, from what I could see in the scene, they don't actually end up Xing anybody, they just injure people. And at this point, Zach and Gray are back in the main part of the park, and they are also running from being X'd by pterodactyls. Claire and Owen have made it back to the main part of, I would call it kind of like Main Street of Jurassic World. And so everyone is now in here. And Zach and Gray get to this one point and they kind of meet up with Zara. And Zara's like, "Where have y'all been?" And at this moment, she is grabbed and brought up by a pterodactyl. They kind of play with her and then they end up like dipping her in the water of the Mosasaurus exhibit, and she ends up getting X'd along with one of the pterodactyls that was playing with her by the Mosasaurus. But at the end of the scene, our team of four, that being Owen, Gray, Zach, and Claire, branch up together, and Zach and Gray is like, "Please do not leave us." And they're talking to Owen. They don't even care about what their aunt has going on. They're like, "We do not want to leave you, please." And at this point, Claire gets a phone call, and within hearing like half the phone call, Owen is alerted that Hoskins is now, who is technically now in charge, because Ingen was, I guess, supposed to be in charge in the event of Mr. Mizrahi's death. And so Hoskins is going forward with his plan to use the raptors to find the not Indoraptor, Indominus Rex. At this point, he's like, "Owen, I'm in charge now. You can either join us or you can get out of my way, because this is going to happen either way." And so Owen ends up joining him. And as Claire, Zach, and Gray stay behind, and they're basically in the safety of the ambulance that is like left by the raptor paddock, the raptors are let out, and the Ingen team, Owen, and the raptors all go out to capture the Indominus Rex, while Hoskins is back in the control room eating popcorn, watching the entire thing go down. As the raptors find the Indominus Rex, they don't immediately attack. They basically have this kind of standoff. And within the standoff, Owen is like, "Something isn't right." And at this point in time, we find out that the Indominus Rex is part raptor. And so at this point, the raptors basically turn and become a part of the Indominus Rex's team. And so the Ingen team is lighting up the Indominus, and now they're also being attacked by the raptors. The raptors do end up Xing a few of them, but Owen is able to escape this whole ordeal, still being chased by raptors though. And eventually the raptors do make their way back to the paddock, which, if you remember, that is where Gray, Zach, and Claire are. And so that prompts Claire to start up the ambulance and head back to the main part of the park. And as that is happening, they are getting chased by raptors, but that's more for fun. Going over to a side plot point, as this is happening, Dr. Wu is leaving the park with embryos, and I feel like this kind of solidifies that because he has these embryos and has the ability to make more dinosaurs, he plans on doing the same exact thing in the future. I should also say that every patron that was at Jurassic World is now being transported off the island and is being held in this area so that they could also be transported off the island. Basically, what I'm saying is that at this point, there is no one beyond, even staff is gone at this point, basically evacuated the island of everyone. But eventually, our main team, that being Zach, Owen, Claire, and Gray, make it back to the kind of like the Main Street area and run into the main building because they are still being ran after by raptors. And then we get this scene where they're in the lab and Claire is confused as to what is going on, and Hoskin is like, "That's above your pay grade." And as he's giving his like villain speech, a raptor runs in and he tries to do the same hand thing and like we have a bond thing relationship as Owen does with the raptors, but it doesn't work, and he ends up getting X'd by one of the raptors. This also allows the team to our team of four to run away from the raptors, but they eventually get caught, and there's this kind of exchange between Owen and Blue, and he's like, I raised you. And eventually the raptors do turn back to being on Owen's side and going after the Indominus. One of the raptors does get X'd in the process of this, and as the group is hiding and the raptor is fighting the Indominus, Gray is like, "We need more teeth if we want to win." And so that prompts Claire to leave and grab the T-Rex out of its paddock and have the T-Rex fight with the raptor to defeat the Indominus. And what ends up happening in the movie is, they're ganging up on the Indominus, but the dino that takes the final blow is a Mesosaurus, who ends up taking the Indominus down by the neck into the water. And then our crew, our team of four, makes it to safety with all the other park guests. Owen and Claire vow to stick together and Gray and Zach are reunited with their parents. I would have to say this is definitely one of my favorite movies. It's actually one of my comfort movies, believe it or not. I watch it a lot, which like literally as the movie was on, I was writing my notes before parts of the movie were even coming on. And as of right now, I think I'm going to put it at the number one spot. Again, like I said earlier, I enjoy how there's a back and forth and our teams separate and then come back together. It's kind of a trend that happens throughout all the Jurassic movies, and I just enjoy like this modernness of Jurassic Park and Jurassic World. I like the fact that they take place on the same island. And so yeah, it is going in the number one spot for now. It might change later, but for now it's going in the number one spot. Sorry, I put something in the number one spot, I guess. If I didn't say it, as of right now, my ranking is Jurassic World, Lost World. No, Jurassic Park, Lost World, Jurassic Park. And so I'm going to put Jurassic World at the number 3 spot. Next is Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. Came out in 2018. I also want to apologize if it seems like I'm rushing. I don't know how much storage my phone has, and I really want to be able to say everything I want to say and not have to go through the process of clearing my phone just to finish this video. But we start the movie with researchers in a submarine, and they go down there and find the remains of the Indominus Rex, and what they are tasked with doing is grabbing one of the bones of the Indominus Rex for something later on. They end up being successful, and one of the researchers that is on the island, there's researchers in the water and there's ones on land. The on land team end up getting attacked by a T-Rex. One of the members is X'd, and the two members who were in the water in the submarine get X'd by the Mosasaurus. They also end up leaving the gate that closed the Mosasaurus off from the rest of the ocean open, so the Mosasaurus is now free into the rest of the ocean. Then we cut to kind of these news clips telling us that Isla Nublar has an active volcano, and they are predicting that the volcano will destroy the island, having a second event that killed the dinosaurs. And there are groups that are gung-ho about this, and there are also groups that are like, no, we have to protect these animals. The actual question posed in the news video is, do dinosaurs deserve the same rights given to other endangered species, or should they be left to die? I want to know your answer to this question. My answer, if you want to know my answer, I basically would say, I understand they are animals and they deserve the right to live. I do not think that it is responsible for us to bring them to mainland anywhere, any country. If you can find a different place to put them that does not affect the ecosystems of any different part of the world, cool. If you can't, then that's just an act of God at that point. I'm not saying they deserve it, but what can you do about it? Because in current day world, if you put them anywhere, they would be considered an invasive species, and we know what invasive species do to every environment they invade. But anyways, tell me what your answer is to that question down below. And this is also where we kind of get a scene from Dr. Malcolm from the original series, and he is telling the court, let it happen. This is God trying to right our wrongs. We shouldn't have created them in the first place, and just let it happen. And then we cut to Claire, who now is a part of a dino protection group, which I think this is kind of like character development, because if you remember in the last film, she didn't really care about the dinosaurs. Now she's all for saving them and, keeping them alive. We also meet Zia, who is a paleo veterinarian, and we also meet Franklin, who is a systems analyst. They work in the Dino Protection Agency with Claire. And what the agency is doing when we meet them is calling people and being like, hey, do you want to fund, saving the dinosaurs? And at the end of the scene, what is ruled by the court that Dr. Malcolm was in is that the US rules that it is not their job, or they are not, let me get this correct. They will not intervene, basically, is what I have written in my notes, in the dinosaurs being destroyed. It is not they're not their liability. They will not intervene. And then we cut to Claire getting a call from Benjamin Lockwood's estate, which we find out is this man who used to work with John Hammond. They were actually kind of like co-founders who were both doing the research, they were actually doing research at the Lockwood estate, which prompts us and lets us know that there is a lab, a complete full setup lab in the basement of the Lockwood mansion. And basically, Claire talks to Mills, is what we will call him for the entire movie. He is like Lockwood's taking over for Lockwood as the one guy was taking over for Hammond in the second movie. And he basically talks and does things for Lockwood as he's a sick old man at this point. And he basically says to Claire, you know, we want to go back to the park and save animals and bring them to a different sanctuary island away from the one that is burning and have them live a free, nice life. And he says, well, I need you, Claire, to go to the island because you understand the island. You used to work there. Also, the computer systems have a lock on them. And since you were a high ranking employee, you more than likely have access to be able to get on that island. He was also saying we want to capture Blue, and we know if we just go to that island and try to capture ourselves, that's not going to work. So we need someone who is able to get to Blue, and we think you know a guy. And she's like, oh yeah, I know a guy. And then this prompts her to go and meet with Owen. At this point, they haven't been together, but Claire, because she wants to save the dinosaurs, is willing to talk to him. And she's like, please, can you come with me? He's like, no, I'm not going back. And she ends up leaving the conversation kind of angry, but she still goes. She also takes Zia and Franklin with her on the plane. And this is like the next day. As they're on the boarding the plane, they see Owen in the back. So he changed his mind and decided to get on the plane and go with them to the island. When our team of four get to the island, that being Franklin, Zia, Claire, and Owen, they are met by, I don't believe they're called InGen in this movie, but they are a team that has been, they're an extraction team that has also been hired by Mills to help get as many dinosaurs as possible. And so, you know, our team of four go with the extraction team and, you know, they let them into the system. They tell them where to find Blue. Owen goes off with the extraction team lead and helps them capture Blue, you know, putting his hand out to Blue, doing the hand thing. And then one of the extraction team members shoots Blue with a sedation dart. This makes her go off, go mad, and she ends up attacking one of the members, and this member ends up shooting her. And Owen is angry at this point because he's like, I had the situation on lockdown, and he ends up getting shot by a sedation dart as well. Zia was also with them. I forget why she came with them, but they're about to come at her, but she's like, you guys need me because I'm a paleo veterinarian. You know, Blue is gonna die if you guys shoot me now. So they end up leaving a unconscious Owen on the ground in the forest for whatever to happen to him. And they end up kidnapping Zia to take care of Blue because now she is in danger of passing away. And then we cut back to Claire and Franklin, who, you know, as they are about to leave the facility that they were in, the doors shut behind them and they realize they don't have access to opening the doors again. And so in both situations, they're kind of realizing that this was a double cross. Both teams are being double crossed. They were not meant to make it off the island. They were just there to be used. Owen eventually wakes to his face being licked by a triceratops. He is surrounded by lava at this point as the active volcano is erupting. And then back with Claire and Franklin, they are being chased by a baryonyx. I feel like I said that correctly. They're being chased by a baryonyx and they eventually escape, meeting up with Owen. And again, they all come together and realize we've been double crossed. Where's Zia? And then Owen like hypothesizes that she's definitely probably been kidnapped by them. They end up finding a gyrosphere because as Owen meets up with Claire and Franklin, he is running towards them, telling them to run because behind him is a stampede of different dinosaurs trying to escape the lava. They end up hiding in a gyrosphere, but before Owen can get into the gyrosphere, it closes on him and it kind of leads Claire and Franklin to like roll off a cliff. Owen ends up jumping off the cliff as well. He eventually breaks them out of the gyrosphere, and at the end of this entire sequence, Owen, Claire, and Franklin are able to sneak on to the extraction team's boat, and we get this very, very sad scene watching all the dinosaurs left over burn. Back at the house, we find out that Mills was not, obviously we know Mills is not telling the truth because he double crossed Owen and Claire, but we also find out further that he is not telling the truth because we actually find out he is planning on selling all the stolen dinos, not taking them to the exhibit, but just selling them to the highest bidder. He's also wanting to do this to fund research on this other dinosaur he plans on making. More on that later. But Maisie, who is the granddaughter of Lockwood, who has just kind of been around the house this entire time, hears his plans and she goes to tell her grandfather about it. And he's like, we'll deal with this in the morning because it's nighttime. Back on the boat, Zia is in the room with Blue. She's like, she's not going to survive if I'm not able to give her a blood transfusion, fill her up with blood, and also take out this bullet. And so that prompts this scene where Claire and Owen extract blood from a T-Rex. It's a really cool scene. I recommend you go watch it. But they end up saving Blue. And then Claire and Owen get into one of the trucks that was on this big boat and act like they're a part of the extraction team that's supposed to be taking the stolen dinosaurs to the house. And Zia is obviously left with Blue because she wasn't really originally treating them. And Franklin is kind of acting like one of the fake team members, and he is kind of helping as well. Then going back to the house, we learn Dr. Wu, man is back at it again, and he made this animal called the Indoraptor. It is basically like a mixture of the Indominus Rex and a raptor, taking all the smart parts of the raptor and taking all the magical scary parts of the Indominus Rex and blending them together. He's raving about how amazing the animal is, but he says the reason that they need Blue is because the Indominus needs someone to be the mother. So that's why she was also so important to this mission in the first place. Getting back, we have, like I said, our crew, Zia, Owen, Claire. Claire and Owen are driving one of the cars that the crew was using back to the house. They end up getting fined out and put away. Zia is taken to the lab where she is left to still take care of Blue. And Franklin eventually makes his way to the lab because remember, he was faking like he was an employee. And then this is when Mills gets called up to Lockwood's bedroom, and Lockwood is like, I've been told everything you've been doing wrong, and I need you to call the police right now, tell them what you're doing so we can fix this problem. But instead of calling the police, Mills X's Mr. Lockwood. Maisie ends up finding her grandfather. What happens is Mills locks her in her bedroom and she escapes out her window and goes to tell her grandfather everything. She finds him passed away and she hides in the dumbwaiter as Mills comes in and basically makes this scene like he didn't just X the man himself. He's like, oh, he's gone. Switching back to downstairs, if you remember, there was a lab down there. There's also just a bunch of facilities in the basement, really. So now the animals are all in the cages in the basement facility. Like I said, Claire and Owen are in the basement facility, and there are people coming to the house because remember, he wanted to auction off the animals to the highest bidder. So the auction is starting to happen and they are raking up money. I believe I have it written down. First dinosaur they sold sells for $10 million. So, I mean, 10 million. One dinosaur. I'm not saying I would do it, but that's crazy. And then we cut back to Owen and Claire. They end up being able to escape the cage by using a Pachycephalosaurus, the one with the dome head. They have the dinosaur break them free, and so they are able to meet up with Maisie on accident, really. But they're like, if you want to come with us, we're trying to escape too. So she does end up going with them, and they all come across the auction room. And as they come across the auction room, quite a few animals have already been sold off, and they get to see the unveiling of what's supposed to be the prototype of the Indoraptor. Like I said, it's supposed to be the prototype, but people start putting in bids for it. So Mills is like, yeah, we'll sell it. We already racking in a lot of money at this point. We haven't even sold the thing, so let's sell the prototype. Obviously, Dr. Wu is against this. He's like, it's a prototype. It's not ready. It doesn't have what I want to have. But Mills is like, the money's coming in. I don't really care what you have going on. And Owen is like, we cannot have this Indoraptor leave this facility because that thing is super duper dangerous, and he's not wrong about that. So they end up trying to disrupt the option, and Owen ends up sending in the Pachycephalosaurus in to like wreak havoc, and that ends up clearing the auction room, and everyone is kind of like outside going back to their cars panicking and everything. And then we get this scene where, if you remember, the leader of the extraction team, he is at the house. And so when the animals were getting transported off the island and they were sedated, he was taking teeth from each animal as a kind of a souvenir. And so he's like, I want a tooth from the Indoraptor as well. And so shoots it with a few sedatives. It goes down and he opens the cage and goes in there to extract a tooth from the Indoraptor. Little does he know that the Indoraptor, the sedatives weren't doing anything. The Indoraptor was playing like it was asleep, and it ends up attacking him, Xing him, and then getting free. And now it's in the facility. open in arms. And as Claire, Maisie, and Owen are trying to escape, they get cornered by Mills, who reveals to Claire and Owen and Maisie, as well as us as the audience, that the reason he wants Maisie so much is because Maisie is actually a clone. She is a genetic match to this other girl named Charlotte Lockwood, who ended up passing away, and she's very valuable because she is a clone of someone. She's just as valuable as one of the dinosaurs, basically. We also find out this is the reason that Lockwood and Hammond, well, reason one as to why like Lockwood wasn't a part of Jurassic Park with Hammond, but also what drove a wedge in between Lockwood and Hammond, because Hammond was like, this is not right, and Lockwood was like, my daughter, you know? Boo ends up packing up his lab again, you know, safely putting his stuff away to go somewhere else to start his shenanigans. We have one more movie left, so. And in the lab, this is where we see that Zia and Franklin have been. They notice kind of like things going down, and so they plan an escape, which what they do is they release Blue and hide behind the cage door. Blue ends up Xing, I believe, 3 people in the process, and one of the guys ends up, as he's trying to pew pew Blue, ends up shooting at this container that is now leaking toxic gas into the facility. Thea and Franklin, after Blue kind of just leaves the room, are now trying to contain this toxic gas that is spreading to the basement of the facility. It is hydrogen cyanide. That's what the toxic gas is. And then at this point, I didn't say it earlier, but the Mills scene where he's telling them about Charlotte Lockwood gets broken up because the Indoraptor attacks 2 of the guards that was with Mills, and so this prompts Claire, Maisie, and Owen to kind of like hide and get away from it. And we get this entire scene, and it's a really, really cool scene of them hiding from the Indoraptor in different parts of the upstairs of the building. We also get this scene where Maisie is in her bedroom, and in the bedroom scene, this is where, you know, as Owen and Maisie are about to get got, Blue comes in and attacks the Indoraptor, and the Indoraptor ends up meeting its end when it corners our team of 3 on a roof, and it gets pushed into this glass ceiling, but it ends up saving itself and coming back up. But then Blue pushes it in again in this glass ceiling, and it ends up landing on the horns of a Triceratops. And then Blue kind of runs away, and that's the end of the Indoraptor. And then Zia and Franklin come up from the lab and is like, hey, we need help. There's toxic gas. And that prompts them to take Maisie, Owen, and Claire down to the lab. And they're like, we've tried everything. We can't contain the gas. We don't know what to do. All the dinosaurs are, you know, inhaling it. They're not going to be here much longer. And at the end of the scene, they end up letting the dinosaurs out of their cages, and as Claire is about to press the button to set them free onto the world, but she's like, no, I can't do it. And then as they're watching the dinosaurs like choke on the gas, the door opens, they turn around, and Macy has pressed the button, and she says, and I quote, I had to, they're alive like me. More on that later. Now that the dinosaurs are free, they get to the outside building, and we have this scene where the T-Rex eats Mills, and then we get to the end of the movie and we have this monologuing of Dr. Malcolm saying, we're causing our own extinction, and he's condemning the future and what is going to happen, and he says, welcome to Jurassic World, which I think is obviously pretty cool because now it actually is Jurassic World. I like this movie more than I did when I saw it in theaters. Actually, I did like it in theaters, but I liked it more now, like after rewatching it, than I originally did. And I think I liked the Indoraptor of, like I said, I liked the chase scene with the Indoraptor. I think it was very interesting how it was set up and how it went down. I thought the story about Maisie was really, really cool. And overall, let me see what spots I have left. Overall, I only have 5 and 6 left, so I would definitely put Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom in the number 5 spot for now. So now we are on to our last movie, and it is Jurassic World Dominion, and this one came out in 2022. So getting straight into it, the movie starts with the impact of what having the dinosaurs in the world has done to the world, and it's not good. You know, these dinosaurs, like I said, talking in the last movies, they're basically an invasive species wherever they go. And they are not only in America now, because that everything that happened with Mills happened in California. They're now worldwide. They are everywhere, and they are getting illegally sold on the black market. They are Xing people. they are just wreaking havoc. Some of them have integrated into the wild, but others of them who have not been able to find their way are just like in suburbs. It would be like if I looked outside and there's a T-Rex, like I can't leave the house at that point. But we are also introduced to this company called Biosin Genetics, which the US has given them full power and sole rights over the genes of the dinosaurs. And from what I got from the movie, this means that, like, I think people can't recreate the dinosaurs. What Biosyn seems to do over the course of the movie as well is take different dinosaurs. Like, say, for example, there's a T Rex in the middle of San Francisco. They would take the T Rex, bring it over to the sanctuary in Italy, where the T-Rex can live freely and not be able to harm people. Then we cut to this Sawridge Cattle Co. company, and Claire, Zia, and Franklin are at this breeding facility that breeds triceratopses illegally. They end up saving a baby triceratops and reporting it to the DFW. I wasn't told in the movie, or at least I didn't catch what that acronym stood for, but I'm guessing that it is a agency for the welfare of the dinosaurs. Then we cut to Owen in the Nevada mountains. This is where him, Claire, and Macy live. You know, Macy's grown up at this point. She is 14 in the movie now. She's looking for freedom. You know, she's tired of living in this very secluded place. And Claire and Owen are like, you know, you're here for your safety. Sorry about it. Because you are a genetic clone, people want you and we just want to keep you safe. And she's like, but I want to see the world. Kind of like Ariel, honestly. Also, not far from the house lives Blue with her baby. I think that's cute that Owen and Blue don't live that far from each other. And then we cut to this farm in the middle of somewhere being invaded by locusts. And these locusts are big. They are big. If I saw one of these things in real life, I would not leave the house. That is. Then we see Dr. Sadler. She pulls up to this farm because she's been doing an investigation on the locusts for months, because they're in, like, it's not just one. There are hundreds of them. They fly. They're big. They're nasty. And in her research, what she has found is that they are attacking wheat, but they seem to not attack the farms of people who use biosyn seeds to grow their wheat. And so she decides to go to this dig site where she meets up again with Dr. Grant. But in this movie, they are really called by their first names more than they are Dr. last name. So I will be calling them Alan and Ellie. So that's Ellie Sadler, Alan Grant. So I'll be calling them Ellie and Alan from now on. But Ellie meets up with Alan. This is going to be a switch for me as well. And they catch up. You know, they're like, hey, how have you been? And they're like, good. But then Ellie is there to basically be like, hey, Alan, I need your help. I would like to go to this biosyn facility. I want to get, you know, DNA from the locusts to prove that biosyn is putting these locusts out into the world to eat up crops, and they are trying to do it to make money because they're genetically modifying the locusts so that they do not eat biosyn crops. That would force farmers to buy biosyn crop if they do not want their crops to be eaten. That's terrible. That's bad for the environment, not only for humans, but it's just morally wrong, honestly. And she just so happened to be invited to the biosyn facility, so she's like, hey, I got an extra ticket, come with me so I can do this. Back at the cabin, we have this scene where Maisie again storms out of the house, and she ends up getting caught by poachers. So does Blue's baby. They both get kidnapped, and this prompts Claire and Owen to go on an adventure to save Blue's baby and save Maisie. But we cut back to the facility where Ellie and Alan are being given a tour of the biosyn labs, the biosyn facility. Their tour guide ends up being a man called Ramsey Cole. I'll just be calling him Ramsey. And he kind of gives them a tour of the facilities, and he takes them into this lecturing hall where we see Dr. Malcolm again. And after he finishes his speech, they catch up, and then Ellie's trying to, like, tell him about, you know, all her theories about the locusts and stuff, and he's kind of just being like, I'm not interested, and I'm not interested. And then he kind of orders a coffee, and the coffee machine is very loud, and as that's going, he, like, looks up, looks at the camera on the wall, and, like, grabs her, and it's like, I know everything that's happening. I've been studying it for months in this facility. If you go here, and if you do this, and if you talk to this person, you can go and find your samples, yada yada yada. And then Ellie's getting excited because she's like, oh my gosh, he's not lost his mind. And then he stops making the coffee and they start playing casual again. I just love scenes like that. And then right after this, Alan and Ellie, along with Dr. Malcolm, run into Lewis Dodgson, or Dodgson. I'll say Dodgson, who is the CEO of the biosyn company. And he's just kind of working around the facility, like keeping an eye on everything. But more on him later. We cut to Dr. Wu again in his lab, and he is talking to Dodgson about the fact that he is very remorseful about making the locusts, because he's not more so caring about the fact that it was wrong to do in the first place, because that's nothing new for him. He's more so worried about the fact that these locusts are hurting the ecosystem and hurting the food supply for millions of people. If you don't know, wheat goes into so many different things when it comes to what humans eat. It is an important part of our diet because it contains carbohydrates. So these locusts just eradicating wheat would be terrible for the environment. And so he's kind of trying to reason with Dodgson and be like, hey, we need to fix this problem. Please let me fix this problem. And Dodson's like, it's fine. It's okay. And then Dodson gets a call from this lady who's like, we got Maisie, we got Blue. And this is obviously where we discover that Dodgson is the one who had them both kidnapped. We'll find out why later, but yeah, he's the big bad, basically. Then Claire and Owen land in Malta, and they meet up with Barry, who I haven't mentioned Barry, but he was Owen's friend back in Jurassic World. He was helping him with the raptors. They meet up with him. Now he's an agent, like I think in the FBI or something, and he's on a case, tracking these people who are doing bad things to dinosaurs, and he ends up taking them. He's like, you guys can sideline my mission, but please don't intervene. Obviously, Barry shows them the underground dino world and is like, you can talk to people, see if any of these people have heard about Maisie and what is happening to Blue's baby. And Claire ends up running to Kayla Watts, who is a pilot, and I didn't mention it earlier, but Kayla has this one scene where she's a pilot who ends up flying Blue's baby to the biosyn facility, but she's only in charge of the baby. They're being transported separately. She sees Maisie getting into a car and kind of asks what that is about, and the guy's like, don't worry about it, you're getting paid to transport this dinosaur. And so Kayla doesn't necessarily turn a blind eye, but it's like, it's none of my business, so I'm not going to get involved in it. I say that to go back to Claire, shows her a picture of Maisie and is like, have you seen this girl? Kyla basically says to Claire, it's none of my business. She doesn't say, I haven't seen her. She's just like, that's none of my business. And she walks away. And then we kind of have this scene where Claire and Owen again sideline Barry's investigation, and they are able to find the guy, the poacher who stole Maisie and Blue's baby, but they're not able to get information from him because he gets away. But the lady that they do end up cornering, she was selling raptors, and we have this scene where the lady like tells the raptors to go after Claire and Owen. So it's this wild chase scene, and within the chase scene, at the end of it, basically Kyla agrees to take Claire and Owen to the biosyn facility. She doesn't tell them this right then and there, but I will tell you this now. The reason that she did it is because she felt bad because she didn't say anything when she saw Maisie getting taken. So now, to right her wrong, she is taking them to the biosyn facility. And then we cut back to the lab, and Maisie is at the facility now, and Dr. Wu is talking to her. She's like, I have nothing to say to you. And he's like, well, do you want to know more about your clone? And she's like, well, yeah. And so Dr. Wu basically tells her the reason that he had them both stolen because they're both genetically identical to their mothers. And that means their blood is special, and he can use their blood to change something within the locusts to have them eradicated. But at the same exact time, he also ends up showing Maisie a bunch of footage and telling her a bunch about Claire. Nope. Telling her a bunch about Charlotte. And we end up finding out that Charlotte was not just Maisie's clone. Like, Maisie was put in a petri dish and just grown. Maisie, yes, is identical to Charlotte. She's a clone of Charlotte, but Charlotte was also her mother. Charlotte grew her and took care of her. And Charlotte also had this genetic condition that Maisie also originally had, but Charlotte was able to do this thing and take out the DNA sequence that made her have that genetic condition and replace it with a good one, so Maisie does not have the same genetic condition that Charlotte had. And Charlotte really loved her and saw her as her daughter, not her clone. And then we cut back to Ellie and Alan. They have split from Ramsey and have headed down to the labs and are now getting samples from the locusts. They are successful with getting the sample, but not without like waking up all the locusts. So you have this scene where like they're getting attacked by locusts. It is so disgusting. They do eventually make it out.
Before we continue on, I would just like to say I made a mistake of calling Beta Blue's baby Delta. So know this entire time I mean to say Beta when I keep saying Delta when referring to Blue's baby. So sorry about that.
The reason they make it out is because after having this talk with Dr. Wu, Maisie sets Delta free and then runs free herself. She runs into Alan and Ellie, and she recognizes them, and they all decide to escape the facility together. Going back to the plane, Biosyn, now that Kyla has gotten the plane into Biosyn airspace, they don't want them to land there, and so Biosyn turns out turns off the ADS, which is basically like this program that keeps the flying dinos out of certain parts of the airspace. They turn it off, and the dinos end up downing the plane. Claire is the only one who was able to be ejected from the plane because Kyla only had one parachute. I'm not going to really explain the scenes, that the things that they go through separately, because it's not truly relevant to the main plot of the story. But I will say the different scenes they go to are pretty cool, so I'd recommend go watching the movie if you want to hear about them. But at the end of both their scenes, they end up meeting up and escaping their areas that they were dropped in and making their way to Biosin. Cutting back to Alan, Ellie, and Maisie. They meet up with Ramsey, and Ramsey was like, "Did you get the sample?" And they're like, "What are you talking about? We didn't go for any sample." And he's like, "Well, I told you guys where it was, so you can go and collect the sample because I'm on your side. I think it's been terrible this entire time." And they're like, "Yeah, we have the sample." And so he puts them all on this kind of like tube. It's kind of like a bullet train underground to escape the facility, and the train is supposed to lead them directly to the airway so they can escape with the samples. Dodgson finds out that Alan and Ellie have this sample, so he stops the bullet train little tube thing on the tracks. He doesn't let it get all the way to the airspace, and he just kind of lets it stop and opens the door. And so that leads Alan, Ellie, and Maisie to just hop out of it. He did this because there were dinosaurs down there, and so he leaves them to be just attacked and X'd by dinosaurs. Dodgson was shown video footage to know that this was happening, so he was also shown video footage of Dr. Malcolm giving them information. So Dr. Malcolm is fired. Obviously, he doesn't care about that because he was doing that to be a double agent, but Ramsey is not found out. So what ends up happening is, because Dodgson was like, "Hey, take Dr. Malcolm to gather his things from his room and then get him off my island." And so Ramsey is like, "Hey, Alan, Ellie, and Maisie are in trouble. Here's where they are. Here's a car. Here's a map. Go and save them. And I'll be in here still playing double agent." And so, cutting back to Claire, who is still alone at this point, she makes it to this lookout tower in the middle of the forest. This is where she ends up meeting up with Owen and Kyla. I just wanted to say that because the lookout tower is important. They're still in the middle of the forest, but this is where they end up meeting up. Also, knowing that Alan and Ellie have the samples of the locusts, Dodgson sets fire to the locust lab, trying to burn the evidence. But this swarm of locusts don't go down easily. They actually end up breaking through the ceiling and heading to the forest, setting fire to the forest full of all these dinosaurs. Also, at this point, Dr. Malcolm does save Alan, Ellie, and Maisie, and they are in a car driving through this forest that is now on fire. Something happens which accidentally derails the car. It twists down a hill and conveniently lands right in front of the lookout tower that Claire, Owen, and Kyla are standing in front of. So at this point, everyone is reunited. And before they can actually have this cute, mushy moment and get into the safety of the tower, they are confronted by a Giganotosaurus. Giganotosaurus. Yes. Dr. Malcolm distracts the Giganotosaurus by picking up one of the burnt locusts off the ground, waving it in the air, and then spear throwing it into its mouth. And that prompts everyone to start like running into the tower. It's just quite funny. I'm sorry. And a little kerfuffle, kersnuffle happens, and they do all of them. Let me see if I can say all these names: Dr. Malcolm, Kyla, Owen, Claire, Maisie, Alan, and Ellie are now in the tower. This is the most people we've had on the cast. Normally, the number doesn't exceed 5. We're at 7. I think that's pretty cool. But going back to the control center, Dodgson makes the executive call with Ramsey in his ear in the background to evacuate the forest. And in the evacuation plan, this basically means that all the dinosaurs are rerouted to the atrium area of the Biosyn facilities. So that's where they're rerouted to. Keep that in mind later. The group of 7 devised this plan to steal a plane and make it out of the Biosyn facilities. But remember, the Biosyn facilities turned off the ADS. So not only are the dinosaurs evacuated, but the people have evacuated. So they have to turn back on the ADS before they can leave. So I have to look down so I can actually get this correct. So Kyla leaves to go and find a helicopter. Maisie, Owen, and Alan go to find Beta. Remember, Blue's baby. And then Ellie and Claire head to reset the ADS system. And so they end up finding Beta. Maisie does the hand thing with Beta, and that allows Owen to shoot her with sedative, and they get her. Dr. Malcolm, I forgot to mention him, he stayed back to give directions again. If you remember, in the first Jurassic Park movie, he stayed back. Not willingly, he was injured, but he stayed back to give directions. I just thought that was a cool parallel. He's always staying back to give directions, not necessarily getting directly involved in the action at all points in time when he doesn't have to. But as Claire and Ellie are resetting the system, Dodgson was in one of the tube tunnel things trying to escape the facility, but them resetting the system turned it off. And so he ends up getting stuck in the tube tunnel. And in the tunnels were now a bunch of Dilophosaurus. Yes, yes, yes. Yes. So Dodgson ends up getting X'd in the tunnel by a group of Dilophosaurus. And then at this point, the gang joins up back together, but they've brought 2 members as well. They have brought on Dr. Wu. Dr. Wu is like, I still need Beta's blood and I still need Maisie's blood, and I just want to kill off the locusts and solve the problem that I started in the first place. So they allow him to come along, and Ramsey obviously has been helping them throughout this entire thing, so he goes along with them as well. They almost make it to Kayla's helicopter, but they are stopped by the Giganotosaurus, and the Giganotosaurus isn't necessarily after them. He's about to fight the T-Rex, but as the scene at the end of Jurassic World, they kind of get caught up in the madness, so they're having to kind of run so they don't get hit by the flying objects that are flying because of the fight. The Giganotosaurus ends up defeating the T-Rex at first, but then they run into this name. Therizinosaurus. I'll put a picture on screen and I will put an overlay of me actually saying the correct name of the dinosaur. It's the
Therizinosaurus.
yeah, they end up the T-Rex and the
Therizinosaurus.
end up teaming up and taking down the Giganotosaurus. I just think it's a cool scene, so I just wanted to mention it. But that fight ends up giving them enough time to escape, and so they all get on Kyla's new stolen plane and head off of Biosyn. And then now that we are on to the mainland, and Alan and Ellie end up together, when they're back on the mainland, we are introduced to them going into a court case to prove that Biosyn is responsible for the wheat and locust problem. So they end up obviously taking Biosyn down. Along in the case is also Dr. Malcolm and Ramsey. They are telling their story because obviously they worked at the facility, so they're able to vouch for the stories. And so Dr. Wu does end up creating a new locust to kill off all of the other locusts using Beta and Maisie's blood. He also credits Charlotte for his work because without Charlotte, he wouldn't have even had the idea to do so. Kyla gets a new plane. You know, we are just kind of like getting everyone's story. Maisie, Owen, and Claire go back home. They reunite Beta and Blue. And then the movie ends with another little monologue and the dinosaurs kind of coexisting with the animals that we know now. Like, for example, we get a scene of the Triceratopses walking with elephants. And so, yeah, this movie, I like more rewatching it than I did watching it in theaters. I think one of the gripes I had with it in the theater that it was just kind of like what is happening. And I think one of the things that other people didn't like about the movie was that they were trying to do legacy, and that just didn't go over well with audiences. But like I said, I very much enjoyed this movie the second time around, but the only spot I can really put it in as of right now is the number 6 spot, so that's where I'm going to put it. I enjoyed finding out about Charlotte's story, and like for Maisie's sake, you know, finding out isn't just a clone, that she actually had a mother who loved her. It just so happens that the mother who loved her was her clone. I think another thing people didn't like was the fact that Owen could just control dinosaurs by holding up his hand and being like, hey, stop it. And I completely understand that. It like when Maisie does it to Beta, I kind of laughed at it. I'm gonna be honest with you. I think it's more so because it's not realistic that every dinosaur and species is gonna behave to that. But yeah, I can only put it in the number 6 spot. So Jurassic World Dominion goes in number 6. Okay, so now reading my current list before I go and revise my list, I have at the number 1 spot. So number 1 being the highest ranked and number 6 being the lowest ranked. Not necessarily saying that I hate any of these movies by any means. It's just I like this one the most, and this one not even the least. Just like compared to these ones, this one is number 6. But starting at number 1 going to 6, we have Jurassic World, Jurassic Park Lost World, Jurassic Park, Jurassic Park 3, Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, Jurassic World Dominion. Now I'm going to take a second and then revise my list. I'm going to turn off the camera because I'm already at an hour and 48 minutes and I do not want to just leave it on as I sit here and think about it. So I will be back with you. Okay, I'm going to do this quick because I do not know how much storage I have. I'm so surprised my phone has lasted this long to my phone. But I revised my list and I'm actually surprised by this ranking as well. But I truly thought about it, and so I'm going to say it to you again, going from 1 to 6. We have Jurassic World, Jurassic Park, Lost World, Jurassic Park, Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, Jurassic Park 3, Jurassic World Dominion. Now, thank you so much for watching this video. Please, if you would like to leave your ranking in the comment section down below, feel free to do so. If you want to explain yourself, explain yourself. If you don't. But again, I hope you enjoyed this video. Like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more of me. I post every Wednesday, even though this video is going out a day late. It's just because these videos take so much time to film. And as you saw earlier on in the video, I was having technical difficulties. But yeah, I hope you have a good weekend, weekday, weeknight, and bye.